So I got into an argument with my parents a few years ago about manufacturing versus services. They were lamenting the decline of manufacturing jobs, and I said, "Why is a service job really any different? You're just providing something somebody needs. It's just a different thing, but you're still providing a product that somebody needs." But I've thought about it subsequently, and I think the big difference in my simplistic journalistic brain is that it would be a different kind of capitalism if we have a economy built around service jobs, because manufacturing jobs can be leveraged to create profits, whereas service jobs are one, and it's one person creating one thing, and that person is irreplaceable in a world of AI, but they can't be leveraged. In other words, if somebody's doing a mani-pedi, they can't be leveraged. If somebody's a skilled nurse providing a service to somebody at home, they can't be leveraged. So isn't this version of capitalism maybe more fair and more equal, but fundamentally different?
It is different. I think organizational forms are very different. I mean, there are some kinds of services that look like factory work. Amazon has essentially turned warehouse work into factory work and uses pretty much even more advanced, Taylorist principles of division of labor and various sort of technologies of monitoring and surveillance to intensify work to the maximum extent possible. Um, Others aren't, as you say. I mean, I think long-term, sort of many personal services, especially long-term care, for example, which is one of the largest, occupations. It requires a kind of a personal touch. It's much more, and it's not tons of workers working in one place together. So it's very different. So it's really, and then there are tons, of course, small and medium-sized enterprises that provide services, and those all are very, very different. So I think the challenge here is that manufacturing has been historically very easy to deploy new innovations and new technology and that's why. So in fact, when we're talking about manufacturing, losing jobs, is because it's becoming so productive. That is, that you're replacing workers with robots or machinery, and labor productivity goes up, but sort of output goes up, but employment goes down. Um, Historically, it's been very difficult to engage in that kind of productivity increase in services. As the old joke among economists goes, it takes as long to conduct a Beethoven symphony today as it did in the 19th century.
I had
And
not heard
so
that joke.
yeah, so but this is changing, and here is, I think, another reason to be optimistic. There are new technologies are making services. So if you look actually like over the last decade, in many services such as retail, restaurants, logistics, labor productivity has actually increased at the same rate, if not at a higher rate, than in manufacturing. This is very different. And you want to think about, sort of have a mental image of this. Think about what Uber has done to ride sharing, what Amazon has done in warehouse and in retail. Now, of course, you have both sides of the new technologies there. On the one hand, you have the potential of new technologies to increase labor productivity and therefore increase wages, especially at the very bottom, which is what has happened over the last decades or so. But at the same time, when technology, these new innovations are purely being controlled by the platforms or the monopolies or the large corporations, you also get not necessarily good jobs. I mean, of course, warehouse jobs in Amazon or gig work by Uber, hasn't turned out, to its potential. So you have, because of the intensification of work, because of the nature of the technologies that are being deployed, are those that are purposefully designed to eke, the maximum surplus out of the workers. Technology also, you need the public, you need governments to put their thumbs on the scale in terms of pushing for the kinds of technologies that are more worker friendly, so that some of the productivity benefits of these new innovations can be more broadly shared. But the good news is that we know that we can achieve some increases in productivity through these new innovations. AI, of course, is a completely different level. But my worry is that if you just leave that to Silicon Valley, or the large platform companies, you're just going to get, maybe even if you get higher wages as a way to convince people to show up for work, you don't necessarily get good jobs where individuals have a sense of agency, control over their lives, and so forth.
Let me re-ask Bethany's question in a slightly different way, because I think that basically, in many service jobs, there are no economies of scale. The massage or manicure or whatever is very hard to have economies of scale. In some, you have economies of scale. Think about Starbucks, or even better, Netflix. And it says we are all old enough to remember Blockbuster. Blockbuster was in the service business. It went bust, and the productivity increased tremendously. Why? Because there are no people involved anymore. But the moment you increase the productivity, you destroy the jobs. Blockbuster was employing a lot of people. Netflix is employing nobody to deliver the tapes. The tapes are self-deliver, and sure, employ some people administering, etc., but is a completely different sector. So I don't see in the near future how sort of the services can produce high productive jobs for the masses, especially in developing countries. We had Raghu discuss his book on a podcast a year ago, and he's also sharing your view that we should push into services. But my question to him is, you have a third of the Indian population who is illiterate. What kind of jobs do you give to them that are good jobs in services now?
That's a really important question, but it is not as if we are saying, okay, should you go down the industrialization path where you have the option of moving a third of your workforce into manufacturing, as traditionally and historically successful countries have done, or should you go down the services path, which is untested and has all the problems that you're mentioning, Luigi? The first option doesn't exist, so it's not going to happen. You can completely shut off your economy and try to develop in autarky, and see how much that's going to get you. If you remain kind of a semi-open economy where you're forced to compete with the Chinas and the Vietnams of this world, using technologies that are roughly similar, there's no way that you're going to get more than 10-15% of your labor force into manufacturing, and then you have to worry about what you're going to do with the rest 85%. So either you have a poor services economy in the future, or you're going to have slightly richer services economy in the future, because I don't think manufacturing is an option. Then the question becomes, what is it that you do? And I concede the point, which I think is important for policymakers to realize, that under a services-based model, even in the best case, you're not going to grow at East Asian rates. However, because it's a bottom-up strategy, because you're actually creating, not highly productive, but more productive jobs than currently exist in these micro enterprises or highly informal enterprises in developing countries, it's a more inclusive strategy. So it's not a trickle strategy like the export-oriented, where you're getting the export-oriented companies getting rich first, and then all the wealth and riches are going to eventually trickle down. It's a bottom. So the quality of growth under a successful services-based strategy would be higher, actually. So that's the upside for a services-based strategy. But it's not a conclusion that I reach, willingly. I mean, I reach that conclusion because there is simply no option. And if my story doesn't convince you, Luigi, that a services-based strategy can deliver some development, then the alternative is not to say, let's go manufacturing. The alternative is just simply to be very pessimistic about the future.